Note that this film is both a prequel and a sequel to the first 300 film, with scenes taking place before, concurrently, and after the events of the previous film. In the opening scene, Queen Gorgo, Lena Headey, narrates King Darius Egalner leading his Persian army into Greece in 490 BC during the first Persian invasion of Greece. At the coasts, the Athenian leader Themistocles, Sullivan Stapleton, led his own force against them. The Greeks slaughter the invading Persians one by one, allowing Themistocles to take aim at Darius, who is witnessing the slaughter of his troops from his ship offshore. Themistocles draws a bow and arrow, ready to do the act that will make him famous. He lets go of the bow just in time for Darius' son, Xerxes, Rodrigo Santoro, to observe. He rushes to his father's aid, but the arrow pierces him too late. Xerxes embraces his father and looks Themistocles in the eyes. The latter goes away, Gorgo saying that he knew in his heart that he should have killed Xerxes when he had the chance. Darius is summoned back to his realm to die. Artemisia, Eva Green, Darius' superior naval officer, is known to be as cruel as she is beautiful, joins him and Xerxes. She is holding Darius' hand. In his last hours, he advises Xerxes to leave the Greeks alone, because only the gods can vanquish them. Artemisia removes the arrow from his chest, bringing an end to his agony. For a week, Xerxes sits and laments his father's death. On the seventh day, Artemisia takes Xerxes in her arms and informs him that his father's final words were a challenge, not a warning. If the gods can beat the Greeks, he will become the god king, she says. Artemisia sends Xerxes into the desert in chains until he discovers a cave with a pool of dazzling gold liquid. Xerxes enters with a wicked yearning for power and revenge, as Gorgo describes. Xerxes appears, hairless and a foot taller, with a golden hue and fierce red eyes. Meanwhile, Artemisia slaughters all of the man Xerxes' old allies. He returns to Persia and stands in front of the population, Artemisia close behind him. "For glory's sake, war!" he declares. The Persians applaud enthusiastically. Xerxes plans to lead his army on land through Thermopylae 10 years later, in 480 BC, while Artemisia prepares her navy at sea. The Persians launch their second invasion of Greece. Themistocles meets with the council at Athens to discuss his own naval strategy for dealing with the invading Persians. Although the Athenians are determined to defeat the Persians, they are unwilling to send their soldiers to die in battle. Themistocles insists that fighting for freedom is in Greece's best interests, and so he requests that the best ships be sent to him for battle. He also informs the council that he will seek assistance from the Spartans. Themistocles travels to Sparta to ask King Leonidas and his soldiers for assistance. He enters into a training session where a group of Spartans are beating up on one man who is attempting to fight back. The dude is thoroughly bloodied. Dilios, David Wenham, approaches Themistocles and informs him that Leonidas has already begun to lead his soldiers on foot, adding that he has previously dealt with a messenger sent from Persia. Queen Gorgo meets with Themistocles to inform him that the Spartans do not share the same vision of a free nation as he does. Meanwhile, on Artemisia's ship, a prisoner is brought before her. He chastises 2 of her bodyguards for being Greeks working for a woman of Greek ancestry, but devoted to an enemy nation. Artemisia pulls her sword and declares that while she is Greek, her heart is Persian. She decapitates the man and tosses his head overboard. She notices a soldier she doesn't recognize on the ship. "Well then, allow me to introduce myself," he says before slaughtering several Persians. Silius, Callan Mulvey, is an Athenian soldier dispatched to spy on the Persians. He leaps into the sea to avoid being struck by Persian arrows. Cillius returns to Themistocles and his lieutenant Icolos, Hans Matheson, with his son Callisto, Jack O'Connell. Cillius informs them that Artemisia is leading the Persians at sea. She is thought to be the solitary survivor of an attack on her community. We learn about her backstory through a flashback. As a child, Artemisia stood helpless and scared as her mother and father were slaughtered directly in front of her eyes. A soldier from the invading side approaches Artemisia and kicks her in the face. The troops raped and tormented the girl for years before abandoning her on the side of the road. She is discovered and cared for by the Persian emissary, Peter Mensa, the same one who Leonidas kicked into the bottomless pit in the earlier 300 film. She intended to return to Greece when she was ready to witness its destruction. The emissary gradually trains Artemisia in battle. She proves to be swift and dangerous, and as an adult, she transports numerous severed heads of Darius' opponents to him, gaining her the title of his general. Even with this knowledge, Themistocles organizes his combat strategy. Icolos points out that their little naval is outnumbered by the much bigger Persian navy, and that the operation is suicide. Such is the plan, Themistocles says. In the present, Themistocles confidently leads his men out to the Aegean Sea, where Artemisia commands her navy. Her general, Artaphernes, Ben Turner, informs her that General Banari, Ashraf Barham, has devised his plot to lead the ships against the Greeks, kicking off the naval battle of Artemisium. Themistocles instills confidence in the men by encouraging them to fight with those who support them. The Athenians ran their ships into the Persian ships, charging at them with all their might. This results in another deadly battle in which many Persians die at the hands of the Athenians. Cillius and Callisto fight beside each other, with Callisto flinging spears against the Persians. Dissatisfied with the outcome, Artemisia has Banari tied and tossed into the sea, where he sinks to his watery fate. The generals believe she is sad at the loss of her men, but she expresses disappointment with them directly. She mulls over the idea of having someone by her side. The following day, the Athenians force the Persians to sail their ships through a crevice, forcing the leading ship to become caught and the other ships to collide with it. The Athenians leap from the rocks and continue to slay the Persians. Cassius, Christopher Surev, the second commander to lead them, is assassinated by Themistocles. Cillius notices Callisto entering the fight, but he definitely does not want to see his son wounded. From her ship, Artemisia observes Themistocles' tactics and command. Artaphernes takes a boat to the Athenians' camp on the coast to put Themistocles onto Artemisia's barge. When she brings him into her private chambers, she compliments him on his battling skills. She inquires as to if he fights for anyone in Athens. According to Themistocles, he has no time for a family or children. Artemisia invites him to join her, so he will not have to deal with conflict or responsibilities. They then begin having hard, intense, and violent sex, which her guards can clearly hear. When Artemisia repeats her offer, Themistocles simply says no, and Artemisia tosses him off of her, snarling at him that he is not a deity, but merely a man. Themistocles returns to the camp, alerting his soldiers that Artemisia is ready to damn them. The Persian ships poured tar into the sea the next day of the conflict, as do some guards swimming out to the Athenians with explosives attached to their backs. Until Artemisia fires her arrows, the Athenians fight off the guards. To ignite the tar, the Persians fire burning arrows. Callisto watches as Artemisia fires 3 more arrows into Cillius. A huge Persian hurls torches from one of the Persian ships to keep the fires burning. When he is struck by an arrow, he drops the torch on himself, setting himself on fire. He jumps off the ship into the tar, causing a wave of fire to hit an Athenian ship as well as the Persian ship, causing it to explode. Artemisia fires another flaming arrow into the back of a Persian carrying an explosive as he climbs aboard Themistocles' ship. He tells everyone to leave the ship and charges for the Persian. Before he can strike him, the explosive detonates, destroying the ship and taking Themistocles with it. Artemisia stands proudly by as her adversary sinks. Themistocles drowns in the sea, among the bodies of his dead colleagues. Before one of them rushes at him, he sees two serpent-like animals swim to them and devour them. Callisto jolts Themistocles awake from his slumber. He realizes that this occurrence may have been orchestrated to reduce his ego, or to remind him of his error in not executing Xerxes. As Silius is dying, Themistocles walks over to his side. He encourages his pal to keep fighting and tells him something else before finally passing. Themistocles laments the death of his companion. Callisto asks Themistocles what his father's final words were, but Themistocles promises to tell him later. Meanwhile, on land, Xerxes and his army have just assassinated Leonidas and his 300 Spartans following the 3-day terrible battle of Thermopylae. A brief flashback to the last film. The birds pick at the eyes of the dead Spartans, while the Persians march triumphantly towards Athens. A messenger brings the news of the defeat to Themistocles. He returns to Sparta to face Ephialtes, Andrew Tiernan, the deformed hunchback who deceived and sold the Spartans to Xerxes. He does not cower, seemingly repentant for his crimes, when Themistocles lowers his sword to him, remarking that there is little beauty in him, and even less in what he's done. Ephialtes goes on to say that Xerxes is leading his army to Athens to destroy it. Themistocles keeps him alive, so he can deliver the message to the Persians that the Greeks will fight to the death. Themistocles travels to Queen Gorgo to meet with her. Dilios, who is now partially blind, tells him not to expect a pleasant reception. Gorgo is still grieving the loss of her husband. Although Themistocles begs her to continue fighting, she refuses to send any more husbands, fathers, or sons out to be sacrificed. He hands her Leonidas' sword, stating it belongs to her. Gorgo bursts into tears at the sight of it. Athens is conquered by the Persian army. As his forces lay waste to the populace and burn everything down, Xerxes proudly lifts Leonidas' head over the city. He continues to boast about his win, claiming that Themistocles was nothing more than a coward. Ephialtes returns to Xerxes and Artemisia to report that the Greeks, led once again by Themistocles, are continuing to take their war back into the sea. Artemisia pledges to end the Athenians once and for all after hearing his name and realizing he is not dead. She walks away to prepare her command. Themistocles recognizes that his troops may be tired of fighting, knowing that they, too, would refuse to see any more bloodshed. He encourages people to act for themselves and to leave immediately if they want to keep their freedom, but he also encourages them to stay and fight. Let it be demonstrated that we prefer to die on our feet rather than live on our knees. The Athenians applaud. In their final fight, the small number of Athenian ships face the massive Persian navy at sea. Themistocles informs Callisto his father's parting words, which are that he has earned a seat at the table and is prepared to battle. Both Themistocles and Artemisia are preparing to lead their armies into combat. The decisive naval battle of Salamis begins. When their ships collide, the Athenians charge the Persians, fighting rapidly and viciously. Artemisia, not one to sit back and watch, holds her 2 swords and attacks the Greeks, killing as many as she can on her own. Through the conflict, Themistocles rides his horse till he reaches Artemisia's ship. He reminds her of her previous offer and says he still says no. She becomes enraged and fights a duel with him. He fights with ferocity, and she remarks that he fights harder than he fucks. They fight until they had both of their swords at each other's throats. Themistocles continues to reject joining Artemisia, telling her that it is time for her to surrender. He's turned his back on her. Artemisia finally dies, just as Gorgo and Dilios board her ship to stand by Themistocles. We see Gorgo leading her Spartan troops, having told them the story from the start, leading into her own inspiring speech as they approach the Persian fleet. Armies from other ally nations also join the war. While still holding Artemisia with his sword to her throat, Themistocles points this out to her. He begs her to give up. She refuses and grabs her blade to kill, but Themistocles instantly thrusts his sword into her stomach. Artemisia bends her knees. She watches as the allied forces surround her navy in her closing moments. Xerxes, standing on the cliff edge, The video concludes with the Spartans and Athenians working together to finally vanquish the Persians. The naval battle of Salamis was eventually recorded in history as one of the most crucial engagements of the ancient world, and the joint Athenian-Spartan triumph drove the Persians to flee from Greece for good.